And if you want to just let us know when we're recording, we will get started.
David, you're recording.
All right. Well, welcome. I'm David Heinen from the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. Thank you for joining us today as relatively short notice for today's webinar. As many of you know, probably everybody on this webinar is aware that last week the North Carolina Department of Commerce opened up the Mortgage Utility and Rent Relief grant program to nonprofits. It had been something that for the first month it was only open to for-profits. The center has long taken the position that when there's relief out there for for-profits, that generally it's good for it to be available to nonprofits. And we're really appreciative that the North Carolina Department of Commerce has opened this grant program up. You're going to hear from Dan Gerlach, who's been working with the Department of Commerce on this grant program and some other grant programs for businesses and nonprofits during the pandemic, with some details about it. It is for organizations in certain industries that have been closed during the pandemic. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan now. And there should be ample time for if you have questions as well. I suspect that many of the organizations on the call today are going to find that you're probably eligible for these grants, and you're going to want to go ahead and apply. And probably some of you may realize that it might not be quite the right fit for your organization, but hopefully this will really help you figure that out and know what next steps you need to do. So with that, Dan, thank you for taking the time today to do this with us and for opening this up to nonprofits.
My pleasure, and good morning, everybody. David, if I might, two things before I start sharing my screen and going through the program itself is, one is on the Job Retention Grant Program, which is a previous program that we ran through the Department of Commerce, and I had the pleasure of assisting, and David was kind enough to arrange for us to do a webinar. We know how important that program was to the nonprofit sector. 25% of the recipients were in fact nonprofit organizations in some way, shape, or form. If you or your organization applied for that and you didn't hear, please let us know, because the Economic Investment Committee, which is associated with the Department of Commerce, has awarded all of those grants now, and we are able to find money enough to fully fund all those. But in case what we're going to do is we're going to go through and talk about this program. I also want to tell you, when the governor announced the Mortgage Utility and Rent Relief Program and indicated here's the eligibility criteria, it took David Heinen about 35 nanoseconds to get to me and I'm not saying complain, but express concern about the nonprofit eligibility, and really was I think did a great job in helping us figure out a way how to open it up. And so thank you, David, for bringing that to the attention. A great advocate. This is an unsponsored commercial for the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, but clearly did a great job. And then without him, we wouldn't have done this. Can everybody see my screen? David, can you see the screen? Okay, so here we have the Mortgage Utility and Rent Relief Program. Let me talk about it. So the yellow, during the slide presentation, I have some highlighted sections. Those are things that we changed within the last couple of weeks as we realized that we were going to be able to have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, to broaden the assistance program in some way, shape, or form, including to nonprofit organizations. And this particular program is targeted at ones that have not been able to operate generally during the COVID period. A textbook example of this that's been brought to our attention has been some of the museums that are members of this. If you're not a museum, I'm not casting any kind of analysis of whether you're eligible or not. It's just these organizations that weren't able to function at all. The funding for this comes from the federal coronavirus relief funds. I believe after the elections, I'm not going to offer any analytics on that, but to say is that the likely outcome of that is there's not going to be any more relief packages for the next little bit, would be my guess on that. But this money has to be spent by December 30th, so we're in a hurry to move this along. It is a direct payment. This is not a loan. I mean, there's some programs out there like the EIDL from the Small Business Association that is a loan. There are some other programs, this is grants. This is not really a grant. And by that, it reduces the amount of paperwork that you would have to do. Those of you who have ever done business with state government, and gotten a grant from state government as a nonprofit organization understand the high level of accountability that the state demands from that. And we're still going to demand accountability, but not as much as the paperwork and the record keeping that would come along with the grant program. So it is benefited if you have a nonprofit, you have up to 2 locations. You can get assistance for both locations. Just with the proviso that you have under 50 employees at each location. Or if you have one where there's 200 and one where there's 30, you can apply for the one where there's 30. It's first come, first served. We do not anticipate that we're going to run out of money on this program, to be blunt about it, if you get your application in today. So is my business or nonprofit eligible? So in addition to the broadening of it to nonprofits, we also broadened the kind of categories that were available, because we realized that we had a list of things like bars and movie theaters and gyms and your fitness centers, excuse me. And we realized that some of them were obvious and had been ordered to be closed, and others, because of size limitations, where it becomes clear that if you can't have gatherings of over 25 people, you can't run your business. Basically, we're shut down. So we expanded it to the highlighted categories, but if you fall into any of these categories, so if you're a YMCA, I would imagine, and you're an indoor fitness or recreation facility, and that's the kind of way you categorize yourself, you're now eligible. And these other things were things we added. So museums were always part of the deal, but as David Hyman pointed out in this kind of subtle way, he goes, well, Dan, there were not really a lot of for-profit museums, so why are you putting that in our face? So we expanded it to zoos and botanical gardens. Again, that was, if you're a botanical garden or zoo, thank David Hyman, because I would not have thought of that, but he mentioned that as something that he had heard about from some of his members. So you have to plan to reopen. If you're closed, then it kind of defeats the purpose. And you had to be closed or very inoperable between April and July, basically between up to stage 3. How much can you receive? So, okay, now you said, okay, I'm on that list, that's me. You can receive up to 4 months of rent between the April and August period, up to 4 months of mortgage interest if you have a mortgage rather than rent. And if you have 4 months of utility cost. And the utility costs that we will pay for are only the ones on this list, okay? If it's anything else, if it's trash or if it's something else, no, this is it. And these things together can be up to $20,000 per location. So if you're a nonprofit and you have 2 locations, it can be up to $40,000, all right? Or if you say, okay, maybe you have this way, well, my rent on my property is $10,000 a month, and so I've written checks for $40,000 over a 4-month period. Dan, do I have to put in all the other stuff? Like, the answer is no. Once you get to 20,000, you can just give us the paperwork we need, which I'll talk about in a second. We want all the information we need, but only the information we need. All right. So here's eligibility. Here's the small print. So let me explain this. In another program, if you got certain programs at all, you cannot get that program. I'm talking about the job retention grant. Now this program, question is, if you got a PPP, let's just use the PPP, can you get access to this program? And the answer is yes. So if you got a PPP and used all that money to pay for your payroll, but you didn't have enough in your PPP to pay for your rent or your mortgage, then you're like, oh, you can use this for that, and then assign all the money you got from the PPP to your payroll, especially since they changed the PPP to go to 20, I think it's 20 weeks, isn't it, David, of expenses. You can use that for payroll and use MURR for this. You just can't use the same money twice. You can't use the federal money from the MURR to pay for stuff that you use the PPP to pay for. So we'll ask you to certify that you didn't do that. Now, some of you who are sharp probably went back and looked at the last slide and said, well, Dan, when you say April, May, June, July, and August, that's 5 months, not 4. And the reason we wanted to do that is include 5 months so that in case there's a month or two where you had some of those expenses paid for by PPP, the other months you might be able to get the help from the MURR program. So as I said, there's no double dipping. So what will you have to provide? One is you'll have to prove evidence by way of a lease or a mortgage agreement or something like that, that you had an obligation to pay, or a utility bill. You had an obligation to pay somewhere during that period. All right. And with the utility bills, say the bill is like, it covers your period of service between March 28th and April 28th. As long as part of that bill falls into the April to August framework, you're fine. You can't claim 5 months of it, but you can claim up to 4 months. So whatever 4 months are they're the highest, you claim. And then you have to show an obligation that you had the obligation to make a payment. And then you have to show evidence that you paid it. In other words, you will have to show us canceled checks or some kind of documentation on a bank statement that you made these payments. There's concern among others that said, oh, we've got to deal with the landlord. They haven't been really pressing on us. But you should have to show the payment, because our relief is not for the landlord. Our relief is for you. But note this new yellow section at the bottom to accommodate that. The idea here is what some businesses worried about. They said, well, what if we go and, okay, we understand we can give relief. So what if we go and we write a check right now, today, to our landlord, and we get current, and then we find out, oh shoot, they ran out of money at the state, so now I'm holding the bag. No holding the bag here, because if you fill out the application and you haven't yet paid, we'll hold your place in line through November 13th. So Friday week. For November 13th, allow you to do that. And you show us evidence that you've made payment, there you go. We'll guarantee it may be that we don't run out of money and you can show us evidence later, but I would strongly say if you want to qualify for this program, go ahead and apply quickly and get going now. We got a lot of questions I see popping up in the chat. So the fine print is your application subject to the public records law. So if we give you a direct payment and people ask for your name, we're going to give it to them. You're going to have to certify you're going to continue you're not just taking this and shutting it down and shutting your nonprofit down, but you're going to continue to operate that. The idea that it's taxable income doesn't matter as much to the nonprofit community as it would to the private sector community. But you'll have to say that you're going to get a W-9 form from us, and you're going to be considered a vendor. So there's some deals with this in some fine print as well. So the application process is here. If you don't remember anything else I say, take note of this website. The application is available at ncommerce.com/MURR. All the information you need is there. There's a sample application, so you can kind of look that over, and I would advise that before you walk through and actually fill it out. And then we have steps of the process. Well, one is we're going to want to make sure that you're eligible before we put you through everything else. So if you submit the information, you say we were closed, I'm a museum, there you go. And we say, okay, you're eligible. Then within a few minutes, I believe it's traditionally been our experience, a few minutes, you get another email that said, okay, now that we've established you're eligible, give us documentation on what expenses you had obligations for and what payments you've made. So we'll allow you to do that. And then once we get to that and we assess it, we may ask you some questions. The cleaner you can make this application, the better your record keeping. I would say get it right and rather than quick, because we've had a lot of issues with businesses that have applied that didn't quite have their paperwork. They didn't attach a lease, or they didn't attach, they had their utility bills, but not the payments, or the payments, but not the utility bills. So make sure you have all these things together, all right? And then we'll assess that. And we have a team of maybe a little fewer than 10, I think, but people going through this because we want to get these payments out quickly because we have to get out through December 30th. One more thing, excuse me. You'll be getting a Salesforce. Your emails on this, the communications will come from Salesforce. So it's kind of a quirky, how do I say this? It may look like some kind of spam email to you. It is not. If it's a Salesforce related email, that's us, that's legit. And so please respond to us as we link you through this application process. So So what information do you need? Your Secretary of State ID and EIN. If you don't have a Secretary of State EID, it's fine. And I understand some nonprofits don't worry about that. But your EIN, we're going to need your front page of your tax return, because we want to see what NAICS code you're in, which is the classification of businesses, and it should be on there because we're going to match that up with our list of eligible businesses and so forth. And again, the documentations of the obligations and the documentations of the payments. That is information that you will want now. And so that's it. We've been at this for a month. We still got plenty of money. I'm a budget guy, so I never say plenty of money, but we believe we're going to be able to handle this universe if you get your application in quickly. And I want to just leave this up. If you want to ask any follow-up questions, I want to go through, David, I have time to go through all the questions that you, if you could read them to me, I haven't been following all this, but I want to just leave the screen up for a couple minutes so people can get this information down. And we will be distributing this slide deck to everybody. I'm reliably informed. Thanks for your attention. I know that's a lot to take in. David, I'm ready if you are.
Thank you, Dan. And I think you answered the first question about whether PPP recipients can use it as long as they're not double dipping for the same funds, but receiving the PPP doesn't make an organization ineligible.
That is correct.
That's what we heard. A few questions we received, and for those of you who asked it, if I'm not restating it correctly, because I'm trying to summarize a few, is if they weren't closed for the entire period, but were only closed for say 2 months of the, so like they were closed maybe for April and May, but not the whole time, are they eligible or partially eligible?
Probably not, right? I mean, I think what you will have to say is you're free to apply, but we're free to say no. It is really for those, this is a specifically targeted program at those entities that have not been able to be open at all during that period.
Got it. Okay.
Let me make a sense where say you were a Y or some kind of nonprofit fitness facility, and you've let people in because they had medical notes from their doctor or something like that. You were still from what we would consider that closed. So.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, next question. This was a kind of a technical application question, so I'm just going to read it. Can you please clarify the stage 3 federal funds documentation? Is the amount supposed to be the total amount we're requesting, the amount requested less PPP funds, or the PPP funds received?
It will be the amounts you've requested that you want a check from, that you're eligible to get a check from us for.
Got it. Okay. Next question, let's see, another one about the entire period. Specifically as a garden, we had limited children following safety protocols for camp in late June and July. All other earned revenue avenues were closed. Can they still apply, or would they apply for funds on April through late June only?
You can't, it's kind of the whole period is what we're looking at here. But what I would suggest, if you have a question like that, it's a very specific question, I would email murr@ncommerce.com that you see on your screen. And the reason why I would do that, David, is because that email, because all of us who work on the program have access to that. And so if there's some kind of question, you don't want to get have me answer in a different way than somebody else answers it. So we want to assure consistency if these things come up.
Okay. So, and we'll put that in the chat and in the follow-up email as well.
Thank you very much for that.
We'll receive so that you know who to contact. A couple specific questions about, and I'm going to go ahead and ask this because I think there might be a few organizations on the call who are along these same lines about types of entities and types of businesses. Might a camp and retreat center qualify as a conference center? And then I'm going to ask a second one too, because it's related. Nonprofit that hosts program workshops at conference centers or co-working spaces. So would those qualify?
I think what we're going to look is, what is your primary source of business, right? What is your, how do you think yourself? If you're I don't have a good example, but if you're a nonprofit where your main business is working with after school programs, but you happen to have a big gym that you rent out for conference space, that's not what we're talking about. If your main business is like we're a retreat center where we are expected to get revenue in, and that's what we do, and we haven't been able to use it because of that, and so we've basically been out of operation, that would be eligible.
Okay.
But again, one thing is you can answer that question back once you look at how you're characterized. If you're like a retreat center and that's all you do, and I know some of these church retreat centers that's the ones I know of at least, those would be, I think, eligible.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm just trying to make sure, because we've got a lot of questions in here now, so I want to make sure I'm not missing any. Can you repeat what you said about the job retention grant, specifically whether organizations that received a job retention grant can still apply for MURR?
Well, I didn't say that, but here's the thing. So the job retention grant was based on, I was just giving information on that while we had everybody on the call. So it's not related to this program. Although what I would say is, if you're able to keep everybody on payroll, which is the signature issue of the job retention grant program, at decline in revenue, that's fine with me. I don't see anything precluding it. We kind of thought that it would be difficult for somebody who's been shut the whole time, as the MURR program targets, to be able to have pay their employees or maintain their employment. So we saw it as a complementary program, but there is no restriction if you meet the guidelines from applying for this program, if you also apply for the job retention grant program.
Thank you for that clarification. And this might be one that they need to email you, or email MURR. How does one edit the application to include additional documents?
Well, there's a stump the professor thing too. I would think just email it. Email the address there and refer, if you have a identification number, then use that.
Okay, thanks. If an organization was operating but at a very reduced rate, so I'm assuming that 5% of people were coming to whatever type of facility it was, are they eligible?
You're going to have to sort of, here's how we're going to verify that. I am not, the retreat center cop here. I mean, what we're going to say is that you're going to have to say you were closed between this period and certify that I attest that I was closed. And if you're saying that, I would consider that closed. Okay. I mean, but I would be,
Yeah.
That's how I'd answer that question.
Okay. Another similar question, and I think this is kind of analogous to your YMCA, so you can just say, but I just want to acknowledge that we got this. What if we're partially closed, could not open facility to the public, but we're still providing food programs out in the community for seniors, considered essential for government?
Well, I would think, okay, so what your primary business is, that's what I'm worried about. So we had this example where people were asking us, okay, I run a gym, I run something where people physically come to my location. Now they're not able to physically come, but I did some online Zumba classes or, I'm not a guy, but I mean, something like that. Would that count as being open? And the answer is no. If your facility was closed, that's what we're looking at, not the pivoting on the rest of it.
Yeah, and Dan, that's really helpful, because I've heard of a lot of nonprofits that were in that position that, we're doing some type of a very limited online thing. Sometimes, just hoping maybe they get some donations, but doing it for free, but their facility was closed.
Yeah, I think what the whole philosophy of this was, David, is that your physical place of work is important to the type of business you generally do. Mm-hmm. Because of the COVID restrictions, you have not been able to do that. And so if you've adjusted in some other way, okay, but I mean, basically that you've been really affected by the fact that you haven't been able to open your physical facility. Adjustments that you've made to be creative, go online or something are not disqualifying.
Okay, that's helpful. Shifting gears to kind of thinking about the the way payments are made. So performing arts organization that produces theater in a building owned by the library. It's a lease and operating agreement, but they don't pay rent and they pay utilities indirectly. So the library that operates the building pays the utilities, but under the agreement, they're reimbursing them. Is that going to be, will they be able to qualify for those kind of indirect utilities payments if they can demonstrate that?
This is not a question we've faced before. I think that's going to be tough to, but I think what you would have to show is a copy of your agreement with the library, right? The library is basically functioning as the landlord, and say, okay, here's our agreement with that. But we would have to have some kind of pre-existing documentation that you, in fact, were obligated to make these payments.
Okay, thank you. Here's one question that we get from, I'm going to call out who asked it because it's a good one. From Charles Faniff with United Arts Council. He's not asking for himself, but for a number of arts organizations and museums. So there are a number of museums around the state that are part of a university, and they meet the criteria, but they're part of a larger institution. So I want to kind of add one other wrinkle to that a lot of them are part of UNC or NC State or ECU or other public schools, but there are also, I think, some at private nonprofit schools that may be a separate program. Are they going to be eligible? So kind of a two-part. So one, and I think I know the answer to the first part. If there's a museum that's operating out of a public
yes,
school.
if you're part of a government entity, we cannot help. No,
okay.
That would be. So let me, like if you're the North Carolina Museum of History, for example, you would not be eligible for this program. But or if you're part of any kind of public entity, that would be no. If you're any kind of government, part of a government entity, because the idea here is that those governments had some access to money that they could use to help you directly. So this is for separate nonprofit entities. The question about related to like a let's say Elon or Wingate or something like that. I don't know. I would want to see evidence that you have a specific responsibility to make these payments, that you have some kind of agreement, that you're separate C3, that you're a separate organization. All these things would help make your case.
Okay.
But I think it depends on the particular set of facts and circumstances surrounding that.
Okay.
Like, sorry to pick a little bit more at this. So if you're, if you're the theater department at Dan Gerlach University, a private nonprofit organization, and you're just part of the university, and you're like, well, that would not help you. The separateness is what will help you.
Right. Yeah. So if there's a separate C3 that just happens to be affiliated with
correct, because
Gerlach University.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way, Dan, on forming your own college. I'm sure you would be an excellent college president. If an organization's applied for a CARES Act grant through the North Carolina Arts Council and Governor's Office, but it hasn't heard back yet, and they're also eligible for this, should they go ahead and apply for this as well?
If you're eligible under this program, there's no disqualifying. You would have to say that we're using this money. You can't use CARES Act money to pay the same bill, right? So if, I don't know what the requirements are on that program, right? But if it says, okay, this can be used for other stuff, as long as you're not using any other federal money, telling everybody, oh yeah, I'm using my federal money for rent and utilities, then you're fine.
Okay. Does the 50 employee per location apply to the shutdown period? And I suspect this probably is relevant for a lot who furloughed or laid off staff during the shutdown period. So maybe they have 100 employees. Normally they were down to 15.
You're going to have to tell us how many employees. That's going to be a self-certification question. Okay.
But again, just to clarify, they're self-certifying how many they had March 1st or May 1st. Not specific.
I think it's going to say is, do you have fewer than 49, 49 or fewer employees?
Okay. Do you now? Is that?
I believe that's how the applicant, I don't have, yeah,
Okay.
I'm not trying to be one of these fence sitters, David, but I don't have the application in front of me.
Yeah.
But I would say that question
I-
has come up, and I believe the more favorable interpretation is how people are using it right now.
Okay. One person said that they don't have a NAICS code on their tax form, and what NAICS is it's an industry code, so it's the North
Correct.
Industrial Classification System, I think is what it stands for. I will put a link in when we're finishing up with the questions.
Yeah.
In fact, here, I'm just putting it in the chat now. Everybody should see that. And Sarah, if we can put that in the follow-up too, where you can search and figure out what you're in. But it's really just kind of what type of business you're in. And it makes sense, Dan, why that would be part of the application, given that it's for specific lines of business. It's probably helping commerce figure that out. So that makes sense. But again, that's not something you'd find in your tax code, but it's one you can kind of figure out yourself what your classification is. And it's different from the NTEE code that nonprofits get, which is on your tax forms, which is the National Taxonomy of Exempt Entities, which is another code that is used by the IRS and the Urban Institute, I believe, to identify what type of nonprofit you are. But this is for all businesses, NAICS code. And Dan, and you may have said this before, how many digits of the NAICS code do they need to have? This is like, I think a six. All six? Okay. So, and it kind of breaks down, you'll see like the first 4 digits are broader industry, and then as you get to the 6 digits, it breaks down. When you look at it, it'll make sense though.
Right, we're just trying to figure out what you are. Like I'll give you an example from the private sector, right? So bars are eligible because bars have been shut down. Mm-hmm. But some people are trying to say, I'm really, like a place I frequented here in Raleigh, here in Wake County. They said, oh, we consider ourselves a tavern. I'm like, you're a restaurant. Your code is a restaurant. You happen to have a bar, that doesn't count. So the NAICS code is, we're not trying to make it too difficult. We're just trying to figure out a standard to apply. So when the federal auditors come and say, how did you determine this? We can point to some standard that somebody else has set. And frankly, we're not trying to exclude anybody who should be eligible. We want all businesses who are eligible to be counted, to paraphrase the current issue of current concern. So if you're like the Museum of Life and Science, like we can figure out, okay, you're probably not, you're not going to be, you're probably an eligible entity versus some kind of statement that we can't tell from your name what you are. And the auditor's like, why did you give them this? Is this your cousin or something? So forth.
Right. And just for all panelists to know, and not to be the apologist for the Department of Commerce, but the reality is that at some point the media, members of the public are going to be scrutinizing how CARES Act money is spent, and the Department of Commerce does want to be very careful that it's being used for appropriate purposes and not being misused. So I think from a nonprofit's perspective, sometimes it's kind of frustrating to have to to seek out the additional information that you don't usually report on, but just so everybody knows that there's a good rationale for doing it, that it's important for the state, for our country too, that this money that's being invested in protecting businesses and nonprofits that have closed and helping them to continue to sustain themselves, that it's being used for the right purposes and not being abused. So
yeah, and let me add some color. It's not only a issue of media, views and everything, but it's also an issue of when I was with the Golden Leaf Foundation, we did disaster recovery programs, and the federal government will tell you, just go help people, get the money out, whatever, but then they come back and say, oh, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? And they want their money back, because they then make claims that the money was not spent correct. Nothing to do with my former employer, but that's the issue. Is when it comes back to then all of a sudden, oh no, you did this incorrectly, and the federal government wants its money back. They forgot all about oh God, just go help people, or like, well, wait a minute, should we have done that? So that's part of the challenge we're working with within government to do that.
making sure that I'm not skipping questions. Our gas, electricity, and water are on the same statement. Does that statement need to be uploaded into 3 separate uploads where you add a file for each separate utility?
Yes. And I know it sounds crazy, but we've got different people working with different, checking it. And I'm sorry for that. I know it sounds crazy, but yes.
Okay. 2 kind of related questions. I'm going to go ahead and ask both, and you can probably answer 2 of them together, I think. Our total nonprofit has several branches. Each individual branch was closed, and each branch has fewer than 50 employees. May our one organization apply on behalf of 2 branches?
Yes.
Okay, yes. The second one is that some organization applied for 2 locations, however, only received 1 request for phase 3 information. Do they need to include both locations information?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Math question, word problem. I have to concede that I was a math major in college. It's not really a math problem, but it reads like a word problem. But I think I know your answer from before, but I'm just going to restate it. The number of employees section, we had 55 employees on March 1, now paying 23. We have 4 full-time employees and the rest work 1 to 4 hours per week. How many employees do they have?
If you are filling out the application, you ask how many employees you have. It says, how many employees do you have? And you say 4, or we have 23. That's the number to put down. If it says, how many did you have on a specific date, then you answer that truthfully.
Okay. What if we have, and I think this is similar to the answer to other questions, but it's slightly different fact situation, I guess. What if we have after-school programming and a theater facility, but provided some virtual classes, but could not open the theater facility?
Okay, so if you're a theater,
yeah,
right, basically that's your business. You're a theater and you could not open because of this, and you have not opened, but you've done this online thing. I think that would be eligible. Now, if you're a bigger nonprofit and theater is like part of what you do, you're not a theater, you're something that includes a theater. So that's the only caveat without knowing the particular facts of that. But you're certainly free to email and ask for clarification on that.
Okay. Would utility payments made to off-site facilities that we operate our daily lunch clubs out of qualify? So these utility subsidies are made directly to the facility. Most of them are churches, to cover their extra costs and not to the utility itself. We do have contracts with them that specify this.
Tougher question, right? I think it's, you would have to show that these locations are closed down, right? Not because, for what reason are you closed down? The kind of prototypical example we have here is your building, you couldn't use your building for your general course of your operations because of the shutdown. Now, it's like, well, we pay something to these churches that we used to distribute lunches. I think that's a little more challenging, and I couldn't say yes to you. So I would say my sense is you may want to email that one in. But I'm not optimistic about that based on the way I read and hear the question.
Okay. Thank you. Next question, are nonprofit artist residency programs and galleries eligible?
No. Sorry, Nancy.
Deadline for application?
There is none.
But it needs to be before December 30th, though.
Yeah,
right?
surely. And I'm sorry, there's not a set date for that. I answered too cavalierly there. That's correct. And my sense is you're going to want to get this in within short order, because at some point in time, we're going to have to shut off the application period.
Yeah. So
today is the 5th of November. I would work really hard to get this in by the end of next week.
Okay. Our visual arts organization had to send all our artists home and close our galleries and exhibitions and conference space when our campus shut down. Are we eligible?
I think that you would have to say that you're, That is because of some kind of requirement that you were not able to open, and that you fit some of these categories before here. I answered a question about galleries. We're talking, galleries are not generally what we had in mind here, but I would think it would, I don't know how, I'm familiar with this organization, and I'm not quite sure how it's categorized. I take the point here. I think it's going to be a challenge. I really do. Okay. But this particular questioner has never been shy about asking, nor should she. And she's been a great success. So I would email this in and see where I get.
Okay. All right. The next question is whether a particular organization qualifies as an event facility operator. A branch of the library occupies the building with us. The library determines hours, days of closure, and makes all the operating decisions with the organization's input. Who's the operator of the building?
The library.
Library. Okay, so that would be a no, it sounds like, on that one. Is the application number the same thing as the ID number?
Yeah, if I said that earlier, it's not the same as the Secretary of State ID, obviously,
Right.
but that is like, if you are communicating, you should include that number. Thanks, Kathy, for that clarification.
Okay. That, except for the thank you for your help, Dan, comment, and a couple other thank yous from earlier on.
You're welcome.
Or all the questions, and I think I see one more coming in. And if you have other questions, type now or forever hold your peace, or at commerce.com. What's the expected typical response time if we email questions to MURR, speaking of that, MURR at ncommerce.com? Will they be answered during this weekend? So
the answer is typical. Well, the expected right now, I think it's because we just expanded it. I think the responses should be a little bit quicker, although we're just kind of going through the applications, so we're spending a lot of time on that. But that's generally happening. Will they be answering during the weekend? I have seen that email has been. You have gotten responses over the weekend in the past. Whether it be this weekend, I don't know. It depends on, what somebody's kids are doing or something like that. And I'm not particularly working on that segment. I'm just the good-looking face of the project. So so it's possible that they'll be answering during the weekend, and I would try that. If you, and Barbara, if you paid your bills already, can you be reimbursed? Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point of this, is that if you have paid your utility bills, paid your mortgage, your rent or your mortgage, great. That means you're ready to go. Just get that in there, and we're basically reimbursing you for up to 4 months of that, up to the $20,000 cap.
And you will get a copy of the presentation. We'll be sharing them hopefully later today or tomorrow at the latest. Once we've got the recording available, we'll send those the link to the program, the MURR at NC Commerce, and the information about how to look up your NAICS code. Is the bank statement the best choice for proof of payment?
It could be, but a canceled check. I mean, does anybody know what checks are? I run into this problem now with some millennials, but in Generation Y, they don't know what a check is. But I would use canceled checks, but bank statements are also, if you have kind of auto drafts, if you indicate that. Where we've run into a problem, quite frankly, is where the utility bills and the evidence of payment have not matched up. We've got, I think, more than that of where like the utility bill is like $60 and we see a payment of $50 and it doesn't match up. So if you match it up for us, the easier you make it on us, the faster you'll get your money.
Dan, related to the millennials recognition of ways of communicating and things, is because my kids did ask me this question recently, like, what does this word fax mean? Is fax service considered as telephone?
If it's billed to your telephone provider, but I'm not optimistic about that.
Okay.
But we have gotten into this problem. Actually, we're a telephone. They said, well, I can use my cell phone. It's like, no, it's the phone because we want to associate it with a physical location. So Sylvia, I think not. And now I see another question that popped up here, David. If we have not applied for PPP forgiveness, can we cover expenses that would have been covered by PPP? It's like, here's the thing. If you got a PPP loan and use that money for use that money for, I would advise you, this is, let me stipulate, and David will too as a lawyer. I know you'll do this, David, back me up on this. We're not giving you legal or tax advice here, right? We're doing this for informational purposes only. But for informational purposes, if I had a PPP and I got it based on 8 weeks of activity, I would be using that for my 20 weeks of up to payroll if I could, and then use this for rent and utility. But you're going to have to tell us if we find out that you did in fact double dip, then it's not going to be good. So that's how I would.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, with the same caveat that not giving legal advice, that would be my thought too, that, use the PPP for payroll if you can, and then, if you can get this separately, that might be the best approach. If we pay rent annually based on the previous year's budget actuals, how are we supposed to calculate rent?
Well, that's a new one. Okay, Matthew, what I would do on this is show your agreement and then show evidence of payment, because you're going to have to make some kind of payment before we reimburse you, right? So that's the caveat here. So if you said, I've done this and basically here, say I made my payment in June, in May, I thought, oh man, how much longer can this damn thing last? Here. Every May you write a check for the annual amount, and then you would have to, I think, some kind of prorated it. I think that's a surmountable issue if you paid it. So let's see, are cell phones considered as phones? Generally not, right? Because we're trying to associate, I understand they are in fact phones, but they're not telephones for purposes of MURR reimbursement, because we want basically a landline associated with the property.
Right.
That's how we'll do that. So I'm sorry, Sylvia, I can't give you an example on that. Internet bills have taxes and fees and taxes on, okay. I would just submit my bill, what you paid. And I think that whatever your internet bill is, if you could show us a link to the business that we will pay you for, including those taxes and fees. Because with your phone bill, we would do the same thing. If they're really getting into that, God almighty, we're going to have some words. What we won't do is, if you have, for website hosting is not counted as internet service, by the way. Phase 1 application has questions about ownership. You just say you're a nonprofit.
Nobody owns a nonprofit, so, and the PPP had the same problem in its original application too.
Yeah, because I mean, we made some changes, but we're kind of making them on the fly, and then including nonprofits, and then we're like, oh, so that's something we should have clarified, and I apologize for the confusion. But I think you either leave that blank with the explanation or say I'm a C3 or whatever you all happen to be.
That's helpful to know. Dan, I'll try to, in our policy update tomorrow, mention that one, because I know with the PPP, we got that question about 500 times.
Yeah.
When the application came out. And again, no fault to Commerce, because you're trying to get it out quickly, and you had the application for businesses, but I know that that's one that will come up.
Yeah, my final piece of advice is, well, or if there are more questions that come in, I'm happy to be here, but is I would not wait around on this, right? Because the reason we're able to offer some flexibility and include nonprofits, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because we didn't run out of money. Now there'll become a point where we're going to look at how much money is going out, or how many obligations, or how many applications we have coming in. And then we might make further changes to the program to broaden it further. And what you don't want to do is have us open the door again to a much bigger group. I'm not saying we'll do this or not, but in our desire to help as many organizations and businesses and nonprofits as possible, we may very well do that because we don't want to send the money back to Washington, which is what would happen if we have money left over. You don't get to keep it. So my advice would be, if you're eligible or consider you're eligible, and this could be of some use to you, then please go ahead.
Besides another thank you, I'm not seeing any other questions. So just want to give it another moment to make sure that we're not missing questions. And again, MURR, MURR at nccommerce.com is where you can email specific questions. And I know a few of you are going to be doing this. It's been very helpful. Dan, I will concur with that you've really answered a lot of questions, and it
Thank you.
provided a lot of clarity for me too about, as we get questions too. So thank you very much for taking the time to do this today.
Well, yes, and I see one of the thank yous is about thank you for looking after NC nonprofits, and I just would say that you are, you're well served by the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. I caveat that I am an individual contributor to the center, and
Thank you for that, Dan.
you're welcome, and support this. But I think that by giving us a good argument, a good reason for inclusion, and describing some of the hardships, that the center has been able to do this in a focused way. And so when it came time to say, okay, we might be able to broaden eligibility, at the top of the list was to say, well, we can make it open to nonprofit organizations. And then, a couple others who asked questions were able to get that as well, because there are simply things that you don't think about or you don't realize. And then we said, and what David's question was, could you open it? I said, well, let's see how it goes. And if we have the ability to expand it, we will, and include nonprofits. So yeah, we're pleased to have the ability to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, Dan, thank you for. I know there's a lot of thank yous here, but thank you for taking that step, because I do think that as you're seeing from the number of people on the call today, and I suspect you've already gotten a lot of applications from nonprofits, and the number of questions we've had, that this is something that there have been a lot of nonprofits in these industries that have been closed, that this is a big help.
Right, and if you're finding I'll offer this. So if you are having trouble, you don't get a response, or you have a question, and you let David know. David knows how to get a hold of me, and I'm appreciative. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that's what we've got, except for we keep getting more thank yous from everybody on this. So thank you all for your appreciation of Dan and of Commerce for what they're doing on this.
Level-headed and compassionate. Hold on, I gotta write that all down. That doesn't help you with your the facts of your application, but it doesn't help. All right, take good care. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.